Feeling unified. Higher? I feel like that's a little loud. Okay. All right, so as a review, we are in the book of Job, which, as far as we know, predates all or the vast majority of the rest of the Bible. It's possible a few chapters of Genesis were written first, but if they were, that's it. That's all that predates it. So it's a very old book. Job himself has gone from being the greatest man to the least of them in his city. His family's dead, all except for his wife, who has abandoned him. He's racked with a horrible sickness, and he lives in a junk pit, likely right outside his home city of Uz. His three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, came to see him. They arrived. They spent a week in mourning with him. They said absolutely nothing, and then he spoke his grief to them. What he's essentially saying is because he's in all this trouble, he stated the things he said before. The way that Eliphaz received it was he was saying he didn't deserve the trouble that had come upon him, which by worldly standards is true, but by God's are not. Eliphaz stated that, trouble comes because of sin, because of wickedness. And that is true. It's because we're all wicked that we can suffer. But the Lord himself was righteous, and he suffered anyway, because even the righteous suffer when the wicked are around them. Regardless, what Eliphaz was really saying was it's open and notorious sin that all people know that brings trouble, and the people who don't do that, the sin that I don't see, that doesn't get punished. It's only the stuff that we know about. So clearly you've done something to bring it upon yourself, which is not true. That was simply asserted by him. So Job is stating that the reason he said all of that was because of the trouble that was on him. His immense difficulty in this terrible situation caused him to speak out of turn, and it will continue to do so, which he acknowledges and does not stop. So in verse 4, he says, "For the arrows of the Almighty are within me, the poison whereof drinketh up my spirit. The terrors of God do set themselves in array against me. Doth the wild ass bray when he hath grass, or loweth the ox over his fodder? Can that which is unsavory be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? The things that my soul refused to touch are as my sorrowful meat." So he's, first of all, saying that this is God bringing this trouble upon him, which is partially true, partially not. God allowed it to come upon him, but it's the devil who's bringing it on him. But he's saying it's God who's doing it, that God is destroying him. It's like a poison that eats him from the inside. He then compares himself to an animal. An animal, he's saying, doesn't complain when it's satisfied, when it has food, right? A donkey doesn't bray when it's got access to grass. A cow doesn't when it's got fodder to eat. But what he's saying is he doesn't enjoy food anymore. The things that my soul refused to touch are as my sorrowful meat. What he has to eat now is garbage, the garbage that he is surrounded by, the pit that he lives in. That's what he sustains himself on, something that he beforehand would never have touched, and it's worn on his soul deeply. It's probably one of the major reasons that he is in such a low state. I mean, there's everything he's lost, there's all the trouble, but a lot of our sorrows come from very simple things that we enjoy and can no longer experience. Job also, we'll see, doesn't really experience pleasant sleep anymore either. That's another major one. But I can tell you, in my own personal life and the lives of people I've seen around me, when people don't have access to good food or any food at all, they get very foul-tempered. Because food is one of the greatest joys that God gives us in life, one of the things that we can enjoy all the time. He made food taste good for us. When you can't enjoy that, then you're a lot more miserable. So he states in verse 8, "Oh, that I might have my request, and that God would grant me the thing that I long for, even that it would please God to destroy me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off. Then would I have comfort, yea, I would harden myself in sorrow. Let him not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One." So he's saying he wants God to just kill him. He says that he'd harden himself in sorrow. What that means is every time that things got worse, even if his death was extremely painful, caused extreme sorrow, he would harden himself against it so that he could endure it because he knew he'd be dying at the end of it. He is, of course, giving in to despair. He said the same things back in chapter 3, or chapter 2, I think it was. No, it was chapter 3. Said the same thing, that he wished God would simply kill him. This is, of course, a despairing message. It's one that he will reiterate many times. But he truly wants his sorrows to just end. So he speaks about, as well, something interesting there in verse 10, the words of the Holy One. So I think this is probably referring to his work as a prophet. We know he's a prophet. God states him among the prophets. So he probably had access to God's message at times, and he didn't keep that for himself. But we don't know for certain. He states later in chapter 23 that there are commandments of God that he esteems greater than his necessary food. He puts God's word ahead of food, which he has just stated he cares very deeply about. It's very possible that God gave early written commandments from several prophets. We know that at least Abel and Enoch were prophets prior to Job. We know he's probably contemporary of Abraham, who was a prophet himself, and Melchizedek lived nearby. We don't know if he was a prophet, but he was a priest of God. So it's possible there were some early commandments that were not divinely inspired as the Word of God is, but were still commands from God to humanity that were then later superseded by the Pentateuch and the rest of the Bible as it followed. Regardless, he had access to the words of the Holy One. That's what Job states. And he did not forsake them. He didn't try to hide them. And in verses 11 to 13, he answers Eliphaz's attempted comfort that he gave at the end of chapter 5, where he states that everything that's bad happening for Job, it'll all get fixed, everything will be made better, he'll get everything he ever had back, all the people who are attacking him now will be forced to eat their words, and he'll be lifted higher and put back in his great estates if he repents. That's essentially what Eliphaz concluded his opening statement with. Here, he addresses it directly. What is my strength that I should hope? And what is mine end that I should prolong my life? Is my strength the strength of stones, or is my flesh of brass? Is it not my help in me, and is wisdom driven quite from me? So he says he doesn't have the strength to hope for restoration. He just doesn't have it in him anymore. He can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, unless the end of that tunnel is death. And he doesn't have the strength to endure it either until it's time for the restoration. The trouble is too much for him. He just wants it to end. He also then doubts that assurance. Is my strength the strength, or is not my help in me, and is wisdom driven quite from me? He states his doubt or he believes that his life has nothing more to offer. He also confirms in the same thought that his belief is imperative. What is mine end that I should prolong my life? Saying, what is the end of this life? It's not going to be anything good. But when this one's over, I have a better one beyond. His statement sort of takes on a dual meaning, where he's both condemning his current life while also rejoicing in the next. He believes in paradise. He knows that he'll get to it, and he just wants to be there. He compares himself to stone and brass. Those are, of course, materials that could survive for a very, very long time, thousands of years, if they're not actively worn down, and contrasts himself from them. He's not stone or brass. He's just a human. He can't last that long. He doesn't have that sort of that durability, that strength. He'll just fall apart if he tries to. And in verse 13, is not my help in me, and is wisdom driven quite from me? This is a reprimand directly to Eliphaz and what he states. It seems that he thinks they believe he's lost his senses, that he doesn't have the legendary wisdom that he did before. He's not able to think about things sensibly, and probably thinks they're treating him like a child. He's here saying that isn't true, and now he's going to begin dismantling Eliphaz's statements in the first place. To him that is afflicted, pity should be showed from his friend, but he forsaketh the fear of the Almighty. My brethren have dealt treacherously, or deceitfully as a brook, and as the stream of brooks they pass away, which are blackish by reason of the ice, and wherein the snow is hid. What time they wax warm, they vanish. When it is hot, they are consumed out of their place. The paths of their way are turned aside. They go to nothing and perish. The troops of Tema looked. The companies of Sheba waited for them. They were confounded because they had hoped. They came thither and were ashamed. For now ye are nothing. Ye see my casting down and are afraid. So he compares his friends to a brook, one that vanishes in a summer drought. It's a great swelling brook, and then it's gone. The blackish part is about when the ice and the snow melts and all the water flows into the brook. It carries a lot of mud and other things with it. It greatly darkens the water. But of course, when all the ice and snow is there, then it's a great swelling river. But very quickly, that swelling river will vanish, especially in the area they are. Tema and Sheba are either Arabian or African principalities and territories, just well-known ones of the area. And he's saying if travelers or soldiers from these places came a long way, they'd come expecting to find a river that they had seen before. And then when they arrive, it's empty. There's nothing there. It's all dried up, which, of course, in the desert, we live in a desert here, but ours is pretty well irrigated. If you live in a desert and there's no water accessible, then you die. At the very least, whatever you're there to do completely fails because you need water to live. And at the worst, you die. This imagery can also relate to Job himself. He was once a mighty man, like a great river that was swelling. A lot of people came to get the water, but now that he's empty, No one comes to him anymore. People stand far away from him. Either way, he's saying that his friends are essentially, they promised as his friends to be there for him. He expected them to be there for him. When he spoke his grief, he expected comfort in return. And instead of finding a river from which he could drink comfort, he has found emptiness. Nothing. It's as bad as it was before. In verse 20, he chastises himself for that. They were confounded because they had hoped. They came thither and were ashamed, saying that he was a fool to expect better of his friends. They were just men. He should have known that they wouldn't bring him any comfort. And in verse 21, he states that his friends are nothing, which likely means he, of course, knew that his other two friends agreed with everything Eliphaz was saying and were probably about to back it up. He expected some sort of insight, some sort of answer from these wise men. Job was likely, well, not likely, he states that he is just as confused as to why all this happened to him as anyone else. He expected them to have more answers because they were wise men, and they did not. Their answers were empty. All that he got is now discomfort. After a week of silent mourning where he expected to receive more comfort, he now finds that there is no profit at all in their presence. And we see that throughout the book. He gains nothing by his friends being here. All they do is detract. He also states that they are afraid. You see my casting down and are afraid. This could be one of two things. I think that part of it has to do with their rationalizing so that they don't have to face the fact this can happen to them. If Job did something horribly evil and that's why he lost everything, they just don't have to do that, and then they won't lose everything. But if this can happen to anyone at random, at God's whim, then it can happen to them. So they'd fear it, and they'd try to make him feel worse, to make themselves feel better. The other reason can relate to what he says next. In verse 22, did I say, bring unto me, or give a reward for me of your substance, or deliver me from the enemy's hand, or redeem me from the hand of the mighty? In verse 22, he believes they're worried that he's going to ask for something, some sort of gift. He's going to ask them to give him stuff so that he can restore himself. And in verse 23, insinuates that they'd be afraid he would ask them to go after the Sabians and the Chaldeans to get back what those bandits took from him. Of course, he never did this, as he states. Did I say? That's him saying, I didn't do this. It's a rhetorical question. He knows that he didn't do that. They know that he didn't do that. So he's saying that fear is absolutely worthless. He goes on to challenge them in verse 24. Teach me, and I will hold my tongue, and cause me to understand wherein I have erred. How forcible are right words. But what doth your arguing reprove? Do ye imagine to reprove words, and the speeches of one that is desperate, which are as wind? Yea, ye overwhelm the fatherless, and ye dig a pit for your friend. Now therefore be content. Look upon me, for it is evident unto you if I lie. Return, I pray you, let it not be iniquity. Yea, return again, my righteousness is in it. Is there iniquity in my tongue? Cannot my taste discern perverse things? So he emphasizes here that he is willing to change his mind if they can point out what he has done wrong. He's asking them, don't accuse me in generalities, point out something specific, because that's how sin works. You do something specifically wrong, then you get punished for it. But he's willing to change his mind. He says that right words have force behind them. How forceful are right words? But then he says that Eliphaz's are weak, because Eliphaz didn't have much to say, at least nothing of import. He claims that they were made against Job's opening statements. Do you imagine to reprove words and the speeches of one that is desperate, which are as wind? He's saying, my words, the things I spoke before, those were desperate. They weren't well thought out. I was in grief. I was speaking to my friends, expecting comfort, and you're taking it like I was inviting some sort of debate, which was not his intent. He didn't expect them to respond this way. If he had, he wouldn't have said that. He likely would not have said anything if he didn't trust his friends and expect that they'd be there to help him. But his friends are being very foolish right now, and he is now regretting bringing this on him. He compares himself to a fatherless child in verse 27. Yea, ye overwhelm the fatherless. A fatherless child, of course, has nothing. They don't have any sustenance that they can survive on. They have no roof over their head. A father, especially in that time, was necessary for a child to have anything. If the child didn't have a father, then someone would come along and take advantage of that child at worst, or they would just have nothing at least. And oftentimes a lot of evil people would mock the fatherless for being fatherless because they can't defend themselves. But then he makes it a lot more personal, and you dig a pit for your friend. Digging a pit is a trap. That means you're setting something up to entrap someone. He's saying, you came here, you mourned with me for a week, and that was deception. You were trying to lull me into a false sense of security so that you could pounce on me. Now, I think that's a little unfair. Job's friends are being foolish here. But Eliphaz stated at the start he would not have said anything. None of them would if Job hadn't spoken first. They were being foolish. They weren't using proper discernment, but they were here to comfort him. But it's fair why he feels the way that he does, especially when they throw such slander at him. He tells them to look upon him. Now therefore be content. Look upon me, for it is evident unto you if I lie. He asks that, or he's telling them essentially, look at me, see the trouble that I'm in. You should know that my words don't come from a place of anything other than, or my words didn't at least, come from a place of anything other than grief and desperation. Look at the sickness that's on me. Look at the rags I'm wearing. Look at the place that I'm in. That they should know that he's not lying right now, that what he's saying is true. And then he beseeches them to return. Return, I pray you, let it not be iniquity. Yea, return again, my righteousness is in it. He's asking them to revisit what he said at first and to revisit what Eliphaz stated, to think about it more, to recognize that what they said is not correct. He is not doing the things that they accuse him of. He's asking them to go back, to think about it, and not to return with the same answer, to see that he's not the one responsible for this. He then states that he'd know if he'd done something wrong. Is there iniquity in my tongue? Cannot my taste discern perverse things? Him referring to his taste is a poetic way to refer back to his tongue. But what he's really stating is that he still has his discernment. He's still a wise man. He would know if he'd done these things. And that's clear because he knows what they're saying and he's already dismantled the argument. And then in chapter 7, he begins by explaining why he desires death. Is there not an appointed time to man upon earth? Are not his days also like the days of an hireling? As a servant earnestly desireth the shadow, and as an hireling looketh for the reward of his work, so am I made to possess months of vanity, and wearisome nights are appointed to me. So he's saying man's life on earth is like a hireling. You're put here for a specific time to do a specific job. That's how God operates. That's how he puts men here. A hireling is looking for the shadow. What that is, you worked outside, especially in that day. If you were hired to do a job, it was probably going to be unpleasant. It was going to be outside, and they were in a desert where it was hot. So you'd look for a shadow, for comfort, and you'd be working, only looking to the end of the day when you'd get your reward and you'd go home for rest. That's how he sees life. You look for comfort where you can get it. Most of it is hot, unpleasant, and difficult, and the only reason that you endure it is because you get something good at the end. You get paradise. If you're saved. If you're not saved, I don't know why people keep on going, because I certainly wouldn't. And then this is where he confirms how long it's been. So am I made to possess months of vanity, and wearisome nights are appointed to me. His days are filled with nothing. He doesn't do any work. He accomplishes nothing throughout them. And this has been going on for months. And at nights, he doesn't have any rest. He doesn't have any comfort. In verse 4, he says, when I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? And the night be gone. And I am full of tossings to and fro unto the dawning of the day. So he doesn't get any comfort and rest, and mostly because he doesn't get any rest at all. When he closes his eyes and opens them again, it's still night. He's gotten no rest. He tosses to and fro, likely because of partially mental anguish, but I think it's mostly because of his physical anguish, which he goes on to explain next. But this is important to bear in mind. He doesn't get any pleasure out of food. It's painful for him to eat it, and he's not getting any rest. Both of those are going to impact both your emotional state and your mental state pretty heavily. You're not going to be able to think clearly, and you can't regulate your emotions properly. That's part of the reason Job speaks the way that he does. This trial wears on him. Despite that, despite the difficulties that he's going through as a result of his physical discomfort and his confusion about why God is doing this to him, he never breaks from his morals, and he never accuses God of, well, he accuses him of treating him unfairly, but he does not forsake him, he doesn't swear against him, and he believes always that God still has his best interest at heart. He just wants to know why this is happening, which is still prideful, but he holds to his convictions despite the physical difficulties he's going through. So he continues in verse 5, my flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome. This is a pretty gross part. His skin is broken because he's covered in boils. We saw that in chapter 2. And boils burst at times. And when they do, you have big open wounds all over your body. This has caused likely flies and other horrid creatures to lay eggs in those wounds, which have then hatched and produced maggots that eat at the dead flesh and sometimes the living. This is a deeply unpleasant situation, and it's also disgusting and reviling for him. It's probably part of the reason he's outside the city in a trash pile instead of inside in any sort of building, because they cast him out for it. So this causes constant pain. He's covered in dirt and vermin that are attacking him at all times, which just adds to the discomfort, as can be imagined. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. So a weaver's shuttle is a tool on a loom. It's moved back and forth very quickly. He's stating that his days are going by faster and faster. It seems like there's nothing in them. They're spent without hope. He doesn't see a reason why his days are still happening. They should just end so that he can die. He's not getting anything out of them. He's doing nothing in them. All they're doing is prolonging the inevitable, and they're moving faster and faster, likely leading him to believe that his time is at an end. There's sort of this scientific principle that when you have a whirlpool spinning, the closer you get to the center, the faster you spin. And that's probably kind of how he felt. His days are going faster and faster, meaning he's approaching the end. Of course, he was not approaching the end. But that sort of a life, I mean, spending every single day doing nothing, not providing for anyone, not providing for any family, that's difficult enough for a man, but especially for an old man, just providing barely for yourself in this extreme discomfort with no one relying on you, no one caring what happens to you. It's a horrid existence. It's extremely difficult, which just, combined with his age and this sickness adds to the difficulty, but it's pointless. What are you working for? What are you trying to get? I mean, this is why men have families. It's why God created Eve for mankind. It's because without a family to maintain, we don't have a reason to keep going except to keep going, which is pointless, especially when he has had a point for decades. He says, "Oh, remember that my life is wind. Mine eye shall no more see good. The eye of him that hath seen me shall see me no more. Thine eyes are upon me, and I am not. As the cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. He shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him any more." So he wants his life to end. He understands that his life is about as permanent as the wind, which is ever-changing, blows in a moment, and it's gone the next. He knows that an end to his trouble will come soon, and that when it does, the city he lives in will forget about him. They see him now, and then they will not. He also knows that when he dies, then that's it. He's not coming back. This trouble will be over. He won't be forced back into it, and that's just more reason that he wants it to end. And now he begins to vindicate the reason that he's saying all of this. "Therefore I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul." He's saying, because of all this, because I know my life is at an end, I've got no reason to keep going. I have no reason to not say what I think. This is very foolish to do. God takes our words seriously. He says men will give an account for every idle word they speak. That includes the ones after you feel like your life is over and it's pointless. You should never have this attitude, but as we've already covered, Job was in a very, very difficult situation. His emotions were running all over the place, and even through this, he still does not turn on God. But he does speak foolishly and out of turn several times. "Am I a sea or a whale that thou settest a watch over me? When I say, my bed shall comfort me, my couch shall ease my complaint, then thou scarest me with dreams, and terrifiest me through visions, so that my soul chooseth strangling and death rather than my life. I loathe it. I would not live alway. Let me alone, for my days are vanity." So there's some dispute as to who Job is speaking to at this point, from verse 12 on, or really from verse 11 on. Either his friends or to God. I read a couple different commentaries, and each one took a different position. One believes that this is directed plainly at God, and others believes that part of this is directed still at his friends. I hold to the latter, but I can't say for certain. So what we do know is in verse 12, the word translated whale is tannin. That's the same word translated dragon elsewhere in the Bible. So it's unlikely this is talking about an actual whale and refers to some sort of horrid sea monster or something. Either way, what he's stating is, am I some destructive sea or giant monster that you have to come here and tell me what to do? My life is over. Just leave me alone so that I can die. I'm not a threat to people. My sin isn't going to harm others. Just let me die. Even if you think that I am a sinner, why do you care? In verse 14, he's speaking about dreams and visions. Now, this is either when he did get a little rest, he had nothing but nightmares and bad dreams, which, as anyone who's suffered them regularly knows, they'll really interrupt your sleep. There was a long period of my life where every single day around 3 to 3:20 a.m., I'd have a nightmare that would wake me up. That went on for about a year. I started praying about it and it went away, but it was pretty disruptive for a while there. And when you wake up from a dream like that, especially if you live, outside in the darkness with no one around, it can leave your heart and your mind pretty disturbed until you have time to process it and get it out of your system. Either way, it would continue interfering with your sleep. This could also be, however, that's sort of the understanding if he's directing this at God. If he's directing this at his friends, which he could be, this is a direct reference to what Eliphaz said about having a vision. A spirit spoke to him in a dream and explained to him that mankind only suffers for what they do and their place on the world is impermanent, which Job would immediately know by what it stated, that that is not a spirit sent to comfort or to give people understanding. It's not sent here to help us. It was sent to harm him. Job already knows that the whole world's been turned against him. The moment he heard about Eliphaz saying, "I've seen a spirit," then he probably, at that moment, understood what was happening, that they were sent here to harm him more. That when they came here, they were not there as friends to help him. They were there as unwitting enemies at the hand of the one trying to destroy him, which probably was the moment where he lost all hope. His family was gone, his wife had turned on him, he lost everything he had, his own city had abandoned him, he lost all respect, all possessions, but he still had his friends who he called brothers. And then he realized they were there to hurt him, as a direct result of the one who sent other men to hurt him too. And it's probably at that point that he felt well and truly alone. Eliphaz probably meant to impress him by saying, "I've seen a vision, I saw a spirit." It did not impress him. In verse 15, he states that either way, whether it's these visions, then in his sleep, or it's Eliphaz's vision of a spirit, they just make him want to die. That's the reason they're there, is to make his life worse. So that my soul chooseth strangling and death rather than my life. Strangling is an unpleasant way to die. He probably is saying he'd rather die very painfully than continue suffering like this. He states, "I loathe it. I would not live alway. Let me alone, for my days are vanity." He hates his life, hates that it's still going on. He would not want to continue like this for one moment longer if he can avoid it. And his days are empty anyway, so why should he? Now in verse 17 on, I think it's pretty clear this is stated directly to God. Even if the other ones preceded it or not, I think this is. "What is man, that thou shouldest magnify him, and that thou shouldest set thine heart upon him, and that thou shouldest visit him every morning, and try him every moment? How long wilt thou not depart from me, nor let me alone till I swallow down my spittle? I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men? Why hast thou set me as a mark against thee, so that I am burdened to myself? And why dost thou not pardon my transgression, and take away mine iniquity? For now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be." So in verse 17, Job asks why God cares about man at all. He says, "Why do you magnify man, that thou shouldest set thine heart upon him?" By Hebrew parallelism, we know that what he means by magnify man is God giving attention to us in the first place. Him simply thinking about us, setting his heart upon us, is lifting us up higher than we should be. And he's asking why God does this at all. Why does he care about men? And then in verse 18, he asks that thou shouldest visit him every morning and try him every moment. Asking, why does God care to purify men? Why does he care if we do the work for him? He can do it all. Why does he care to make us better, to put us through trials, to make us greater? Why does he check on us? Because we know that he does. Why does he do any of it? And then in verse 19, he makes it personal again. "How long wilt thou not depart from me?" He asks how long he's supposed to endure this until God decides to kill him, because he believes that's the only practical end to this. He doesn't see any way out of the darkness except death. That's the only escape in his mind. He acknowledges his sin in verse 20. "I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men?" He asks God what he wants Job to do. What is it that he's supposed to do to fix all this or to make it end? He wants an answer for his troubles. He wants to know why God is firing arrows at him, arrows of trouble and vengeance. That's what it means by set me a mark against thee. Why have you made me a target of your your anger? What have I done to bring this upon me? And then in verse 21, he begs God for help and asks why he's being punished for the sins that he's already repented of. Now here we can see that Job has drawn the same conclusion that his friends have. He thinks this is all upon him for his sin, for the sin that he's repented of, offered sacrifices for, like he was supposed to, the very image that God gave to Adam and Eve after they sinned. He expected forgiveness, and in his mind, he has not received it. So he hasn't reached a better conclusion than his friends, and he's in fact in the same boat as them. Right? They said, this happened to you because of great transgression, and if you repent, it'll be gone. Job thinks the same thing. He thinks, this is happening to me because I've transgressed against God. What is it you want me to do to make up for it, to make it stop? But I think Job's takeaway from this is worse than his friends. His friends were just wrong about Job. Job here is very wrong about God. He believes that he's done what God told him to do, and God is treating him unfairly. That he repented of his sins, he gave the sacrifice like we see he does every day in the first chapter, and God is not honoring the bargain. by forgiving his sin that he's repented of and done what he's been told to do. Now, this assertion is a lot more grievous than what his friends claimed, which was, it was foolishness, it was wrong, and it was slander against Job. But what Job is doing here is slandering God. Now, he's not saying that he hates God. He's not turning on him. He called him preserver of men. He knows that his life will continue after this one ends. But he believes that God is treating him unfairly. This is coming from a place of pride. Job thinks that he doesn't deserve this trouble. But as we covered before, everything man gets short of hellfire is a mercy. Every trouble Job was enduring here, which are probably worse than any other trouble any human on earth has ever suffered before or after, is a mercy because it isn't hell. Because hell is everything that he's got here and a lot more for eternity. He knew there was an end. That alone is a great comfort. I've gone through a lot of troubles in my life, and I'm not even that old, but I've been through troubles, and the greatest comfort of every one of them is that I know no matter what happens here, no matter how long these trials endure, I'm going to die and go to heaven. I know the end from the beginning, so why despair? I know that there's always work to be done. God has stated that. Of course, he had less scripture than that, but he did know that paradise was going to come later, and we'll see later on in the Bible that he has a lot more revelation too. He knows that he'll be resurrected here on earth at the latter day. He knows that God will set everything right, that his body will be restored and made much better than it is. He had the same assurances that we do, and he knew them, and yet he was still giving in to despair. And his accusations against God are entirely unfair, unfounded, and come from a place of complete pride, where he thinks that he doesn't deserve it, when in fact he, like we all, deserves much worse. He ends the statement by saying, "Now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be." So he believes that an end is coming very soon. He's right about that. There's still, almost 40 more chapters to go, but this is all in one day. In fact, much less than one day. It's likely an hour or two of conversation between them. And his trials do end at the end of that day. So it was likely a bit prophetic. He was probably right about his feeling that his days are moving faster, it's approaching an end. He was just wrong about what that end was. Job lives almost double, I think, his lifespan, lives 300-something years when all is said and done, sees 4 generations of his grandchildren out. His life was not even close to an end. In fact, I think he'd hit around the halfway mark, maybe a little less than the halfway mark by this point in his life. But he thought it was coming to an end. He believes that God is going to come for him in the morning, and he's going to be dead. Probably because he thinks there's no reason for him to continue living. It's possible he considered suicide, but I doubt that. He's been in this mental state for months. He hadn't committed suicide yet. I think that's because it never even entered into his heart. Suicide is a demonic thought process. It is complete pride to think that God put you in this world and you get to choose when you come out of it. You do not. If you try to commit suicide and God lets you die, that's because he's making the decision anyway, not because you are. But your attempt to take it for yourself is a grievous sin, which is, of course, very wrong. Didn't even enter into Job's mind, near as we can tell, but it's possible he did intend to kill himself this night. I think it's more likely that he just declined to such a point. He figured he couldn't survive one more day like this, and that his life was going to end now. That could be part of the reason that he spoke in the first place, that he began giving out his grief. It's because he figured he'll never have a chance to again, and even thinking that his words are going to fall on deaf ears and fall away into nothing, which we'll see later on as well, is another desire of his, that God will pen his words in iron, write them in stone for every generation henceforth to see, a wish that he gets. He probably figured that it wasn't going to matter, but he was going to say it anyway to try and vindicate himself, because that's human pride to a T. And Job, for all of the good that he was, he's much better than any human who's ever lived since, I believe, aside from Christ himself. He was still a very proud man, because we all are. All right, that is going to be it for tonight. You're dismissed.